Hi, and thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to throw a bowl that's about 17, 18 pounds in weight. And also, I am showing a technique that is useful in centering a larger amount of clay than you might be comfortable doing normally. Right here, I'm centering, about an 8 to 9 pound ball of clay. And I'm going through all the normal centering maneuvers with it. Bring it up into a cone, push it back down. All the while the hands are working in tandem. I take slop off my hands and use it back on the clay as much as possible to cut down on the use of water. Too much water weakens the clay. Probably not that big of a deal during the centering process, but it does happen. All right. Okay, so I've just finished off rounding off the top of that ball of clay that I had previously centered, getting it dry. I don't want it to be slick or wet. Then I went and got another 8 or 9 pound ball of clay, and the bottom of it was slightly rounded. And do this to try to avoid capturing any air in between the two pieces. And I throw it down fairly forcefully onto the other ball of clay that's already been centered. And mainly focus on the top ball of clay. As you noticed, it does knock that bottom one out of center somewhat. But I focus on the top ball of clay, get it centered, and then I'll start working on merging the two into one lump of clay that you wouldn't be able to tell was two. I'll pull it up into a cone again and then push it back down. Do this until I feel that it's really one homogeneous mass. Doing this just helps with confidence somewhat, I guess. It lets me know how the clay's moving. I get a feel for the clay. I get a feel for the mass of clay that I have in my hand. And from here, I'm ready for the next step, which is bringing this down to the size I want. And then I'll be opening it up here in a few minutes. Okay, so I've got the ball of clay basically in the shape I think is appropriate. And here I'm opening it with my thumb. Normally I'll use a thumb. Sometimes if it's a low form, like a platter, I'll use fingers, but usually the thumb. I'll go down as far as I can easily reach with my thumb, and then switch over to the first three fingers on my right hand. Go down to the approximate depth that I think I'm going to be working at, leaving enough clay to trim a foot. I go down as far as I think I need to, and then I'll start pulling out, leaving a curved bottom that'll be an approximation of the curvature of the bowl when it's done. Here in a second, I'm going to go ahead and grab my needle tool to check the thickness, make sure I'm not getting too thin. Although if I'm getting too thin, that's just the way it is. But if there's no sense in leaving it too thick, it's one of those things you get a feel for with doing it over and over. But honestly, there's no shame in stopping the wheel, get the needle tool and checking. So now that I know about where my depth is, I'm going to continue pulling the ball of clay open, and at the same time I'm curving that bottom. All this repetition also serves to compress that foot area, the bottom of the bowl. It's aligning all those clay particles so that cuts down on S-cracks and the like. You have to remember when you're pulling the walls up, the clay's getting compressed from both sides. But when you're opening a pot on the bottom, it's only getting compressed from one side from your hand. The other side's just pushing against the bottom, the bat that you're using. And here I'm using a plastic rubber rib. There's just another way of getting that form down the curvature. Compress the bottom also. All right, so I'm ready to start pulling. This first pull here, I'm using the left hand inside and the heel of my right hand on the outside. It's a fairly large mass of clay, so the heel of my right hand is better equipped to deal with that than my fingertips. Some people use a knuckle. I like to use the heel of my hand on that amount of clay on the first pull. One thing you may notice is in between pulls I stop and I'm wiping my hands. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get all that slop, thick slip that accumulates on my hands from the pull, and I'm grabbing it from one hand off onto the other, and I'm using that to coat the inside so that I use as little water as possible. At this stage, excess water is going to be absorbed into the walls of the clay and weaken them quite a bit. One thing to try to make sure you do when you're doing a pull, get in there with your right hand, left hand if you're left-handed, but get in there with your right hand and grab a hold of that clay with your fingertips, knuckle, whatever you're using. Don't start the pull a half inch, an inch above the bat. Get in right at the juncture of the bat and the clay. It takes practice. Obviously, you don't want to go in too far, but you should be able to feel what you're doing with the left hand on the inside as you're doing it with the right hand on the outside. You can see here I'm getting slop that's on the bottom of the pot, the bottom of the bowl, and I'm bringing it up onto the walls. Again, I want to use as little water as I possibly can just so the walls don't get too weak. Otherwise, later on when I'm laying it out, they'll flop over and won't have the strength to stand up. So you see again, I'm trying to go in as far as I can at the bottom, keeping in mind that I'm going to need some clay there to support the walls when they are laid open. If this was a vertical form, I wouldn't necessarily have to leave any clay at the bottom to support that above. And as I get up to the top, I'll take care with the rim to not leave it too thick or to get it too thin. And I always try to compress it a little bit with one of my fingers, either finger on the right hand, left hand. All right, here you see that I've switched from the pulling phase more to a shaping phase. I'm using a large rubber rib on the inside and a steel metal rib on the outside. This serves two purposes. It smooths and compresses the walls further, and it also removes any excess moisture and the slop that's left on the walls from the throwing. I have a tendency to kind of take my time when I'm shaping walls on a bowl like this. I've seen people that can do it quite a bit faster than me. But I think, each person needs to know their own limits and how they're comfortable working. Here at the top, I pushed out the rim a little bit. This is so when I'm pushing out the belly of the bowl, the middle part of it, I don't want the rim to be caught inside of that. It tends to make things unstable for me. As you saw there, I would just compress the rim a little bit with my finger. I'm working on that juncture between the bottom and the walls, trying to get it nice and smooth. If you see me looking forward, I throw with a mirror. That's something I would recommend to everybody. Gives you an idea how things are progressing, and it really saves your back and neck from having to bend way over like I used to do. So here I'm pushing out the middle of those walls, and you can see how it almost has the effect of bringing that rim in. And if I hadn't pushed it out and laid out the rim, it would be way inside and would start to wobble on me. And once again, I'll start laying that rim out. At this stage, I don't want any slop on my hands or my tools. It's not going to do anything but get in the way. And again, I'm paying attention to that juncture between the walls of the bowl and the bottom. Laying the rim out. Here I've switched to a metal rib in both hands. The rubber rib seems to have a limit as to the amount it can compress and leave a smooth surface behind. So when I get to the end, I'll often switch to a metal rib on the inside hand as well. Now I'm using a piece of plastic that's wet, using it to help round over that lip and also compress it. You gotta really work on compressing that rim, or else you can get cracks there as well. All right, well, that pretty much does it for this video. Thank you for watching.